Shabbat Shalom. Welcome everyone to Christ Apostolic Church. We welcome you on this cold, bitterly cold Sabbath day. We appreciate the Most High for extending His hand of mercy, His kindness, His compassion on us, watched over us as we slumber and sleep, wakes us up in the morning. He clothes us in our right mind, He starts us on our way. Only through His only begotten Son we have life, regenerated life, renewed life, life that will be everlasting. It's something having the life of Christ in us. It never ends. It's never going to end. So we're thankful for that, being counted in that number and having our names written in the Lamb's book of life. There's no greater joy, no greater joy than to have your name written in the book of life and knowing that you're going to reign with Him throughout eternity. We appreciate Him on today in this where we're living at right now, having to endure all things. It is one of the things that has been given unto us, an insight unto us that we have to endure. We got to endure through these tough times. We got to endure through this day. This is a day of deception, which is not new because He said it was going to happen. He forewarned us. He forewarned us of this day, of this time. He forewarned us of some of the events that would be going on around the earth prior to His return. And so we're not here today under a cloud of deception, or we should not be. We shouldn't be under a cloud of deception, knowing that there is light, there's understanding in His Word, and in keeping His Word, we do have an understanding. But we realize that where we're living in this country, this culture, where we're presently living, and you have people who, around the world that have been born again. And there's one thing that even Peter even said after his salvation, or the day of Pentecost, when Peter got up and preached, and actually in the fullness of the day of Pentecost came, and they were in the upper room, and Peter, along with the other 119, were filled with the precious gift of the Holy Spirit, the Ruach. But in his writings, which came years later, Peter stated that he was born again by the Word. So there was a regeneration and a rebirth that came through the Word. He had received the Ruach and was born again of the Spirit during the Feast of Pentecost after the resurrection, the first feast of weeks after the resurrection of our Messiah. And but before his departure from this world, he was born again by the Word. And so there is a regeneration in the Word, having an understanding of the Word, having the Word revealed. The revealing of the Word is like a birth. It's a renewal. It's a regeneration. Because if we're fully honest, we have study periods. There's times where we research and we're reading the Bible, and we're asking for an understanding. We're asking for our eyes to be open, our heart to receive it, a mind to perceive it, to understand it, and then to walk in that light. Because there's many things that's written in the book that requires a regeneration. There's things written in the book that requires a birth, being born again. There's things written in the prophets. You can read from Isaiah to Malachi, and not have an understanding of what the prophets are saying. And then you begin your walk with him, and he starts to reveal things in the prophets. And I'm thinking of when our Messiah was on the road to Emmaus, and he just appeared with two men that were walking down the road, and he kind of questioned them on what they were talking about, and all of the unrest, a lot of the activity that was going on in Jerusalem at that time. And they even asked him, "Haven't you heard, about?" And begin to tell our Messiah about his own death and resurrection. And so, even when they had that conversation with him, they didn't know it was the Messiah that they was talking to. He actually had to reveal it to him that who you're talking about, that's who I am. But he began to teach them through the word. He began to teach them through the word and expounded unto them the words of the prophets, the words of the Psalms. The Psalms is David, the words of Moses, and began to speak to them about that. And then they realized who he was. So there was an awakening, there was a birth, there was a generation, there was a renewal with those men as they walked with him on the road to Emmaus. And so in our journey, there's things that we have to understand. And so the first scripture I want to go to is 2 Timothy chapter 2 and verse 15. 2 Timothy 2 and 15, and it says, "Study to show thyself approved unto Yah, a workman that needeth not to be ashamed, rightly dividing the word of truth." One who studies and is put in a position as a workman, because Paul also had written to Timothy and Titus and explained to them the work of the office of a bishop. And he said, anybody desires the office of the overseer has desired a good work. And so in that office, that person that's in that office of an overseer is a workman. He is a workman, and the workman should not be ashamed. And we're in a time, speaking on that, we're in a time now where there ought to be a lot of prayer going up for the workmen. Should be a lot of prayer going up for the shepherds that he's given us according to his heart to feed us with knowledge and understanding, the leaders, the teachers that we have in our day and our hour, because it is essential that the teachers and the feeders have a vision, that they can see. They in the old, in the old, what we call the Old Testament, but it talks about the seers and those who could see, and they were like the prophets. We need, and I brought out this verse before in First Chronicles chapter 12:32, where it talks about there was 200 men of the tribe of Issachar who had the understanding of the times to know what Israel ought to do. It wasn't the whole sons, all the tribe of Issachar, but out of that tribe of Issachar, there was 200 men, which was a small number compared to the tribe itself, and then compared to all of the other brethren and those 11 other tribes. So it was a small number of people, but they understood the times, and they knew what Israel, Yasharal, they knew what they should do at that time. And so in this day, we ought to have prayers going up all the time for the teachers and the feeders and the shepherds and those that he's given us to feed us the word around the land, that they have an understanding of the times to know what we ought to be doing in this day. I hear a lot about kingdom building. and building a kingdom. And I wonder, what are we really saying when we want a kingdom build a kingdom? Do we, has there been a careful study of what a kingdom is and how did a kingdom come forth? You can, if you take the kingdom off there and just put nation building. Well, we're a part of a nation. How did this nation get started? Just look at the history of this nation. How did it get started? How has this nation survived? For they say their birth was 1776, the birth of a nation. So how has it survived for over 200 years? How did it come into power? And then how has it survived? And what is the makeup of a nation or a kingdom? What is the makeup of it? I mean, when you say a kingdom or when you say a nation, what are some of the elements of a kingdom? What are some of the elements of a nation? What does that curtail? It's easy to repeat a lot of things. I'm nation building. I'm kingdom building. I mean, it's easy to repeat that, but do we know what we're saying? It's just like when he gives us a pattern of prayer, and he says, when you pray, you pray, our Ab up in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come. Thy will be done. And we repeat it. I was taught that prayer as a child. I mean, that was one of the things that we had to recite to graduate. I think it was like kindergarten going to first or first to second. I mean, early on, we had to recite the Lord's Prayer. So we call it the Lord's Prayer. Actually, he prayed in 17th chapter of John, but we call this the Lord's Prayer. But we had to recite it as little children. And I've recited it many times in my life down through the years. But do I know what I'm saying? When I'm requesting that his kingdom come, do I even know what I'm saying? Or is it just something we repeat because we've been taught that and it just sounds good? It rolls off our lips and we hear it with our ears and it just sounds good. So we just keep reciting it and keep praying it and don't have an understanding. Because I hear a lot of times of kingdom building and I'm wondering, you do know we're in a nation, and that if we try to build a kingdom or a nation within this nation, it's almost like insurrection against a nation. I mean, you're talking about putting together a nation within a nation. And then we have to get an understanding, well, we're just talking spiritually. We're not talking naturally. We're not talking about naturally putting together a kingdom or a nation, because you can't put together even a kingdom. You can't put together a kingdom without a king. And so is it a spiritual king? Is that it? Just spiritually. We're just speaking spiritually. We're not speaking anything naturally or practically. We're just speaking spiritually. Well, I'm not a spirit. I have a spirit in me, but I'm a human being. I live practically. I live naturally. I need natural things to survive. Otherwise, I wouldn't be here. I would not be here if it wasn't for natural things. So there's the practical and the natural side of it as well as the spiritual side. And so what are you saying? He is establishing a kingdom, and I'm speaking of a natural, physical, practical kingdom that he is going to have here on earth that is coming. It is coming. It's not a spiritual thing. We talk about the kingdom of Yah is going to be in us, the spiritual part of it, where the Father and Son makes his abode in us. The kingdom of Yah is going to be inside us, that spiritual. But there's the kingdom of heaven, and then there's the kingdom of Yasharal that is coming. He's going to set it up. So you have the spiritual, and you have the natural, and you have the practical, and all of this has to come into place. So when people say I'm kingdom building or I'm nation building, I wonder how far you're going to get if you build a nation within this United States of America. We're going to have our own nation. Now, what comes with the nation? Well, you're not going to be able to establish a nation without any guidelines or laws or government. Even our Messiah, he said it was prophesied of him in Isaiah 9 and 7 of the increase of his government. There's going to be no end. It's going to last forever. The government is going to sit on his shoulder. So you can't have a kingdom or a nation without some governance. There has to be governance. And I can't see this United States of America allowing another nation to come up within itself. We just seen some things historically. We seen on January 6th where there was an actual insurrection against this United States government, against this government, an insurrection. And the ones who were behind the insurrection, some of them carried a cross. They had a cross. They had Bibles. They called themselves Christians. They got inside the Senate chambers or the House of Representative chambers. One of them got inside there and had a prayer meeting. I don't know if anybody's seen that, but they had a prayer meeting. They got up there inside the chambers and they had their Bible and some of them had the flags and the cross and they had a prayer meeting there. So that was called an insurrection against our United States government. So for us to be nation building and kingdom building, if we're trying to kingdom build or nation build, means we got to have our own government. We got to have our own government, and we've got to have somebody who's in charge or rules the government. Well, that's going to be our Messiah. So yeah, our kingdom is coming. There is a kingdom that is coming, and he is going to establish it and set it up. And so our preparation that we should be doing, not only is it's spiritual, we need the kingdom of Yah is in us. What is the kingdom of Yah? Righteousness, peace, and joy in the Ruach Kodesh, in the Holy Spirit, in the Ruach. Righteousness, peace, and joy in the Spirit. That lies within us. That's in us. That's the spiritual part of it. But there is going to be the actual structure, the foundation, the structure, and the implementation and the governance of his kingdom that is coming. So back to Timothy, and it says, studying to show thyself approved unto Yah, a workman that needeth not to be ashamed, rightly dividing the word of truth. Somebody who rightly divides the word of truth, as our brother Shaul was telling Timotheus, to rightly divide the word of truth. As he's penning this, he has Moses' teaching, the book of Moses, he has the Tanakh, he has to rightly divide this word. So the word that he was speaking of to rightly divide was Torah, is what we call the Torah, which is the writings of Moses. I kind of talked about it in the Bible class on Wednesday, and then I think last week also we were talking about what the Torah consists of. What is the Torah? The Torah is Moses' teaching, it's David's teaching, it's the prophet's teaching. It is this word. It is this word, because when they asked Jesus about his kingdom, he said it's written in the law. And when they asked him about being little gods, he said, isn't it in your law that it says ye are little gods? So that the whole law book now is our Torah, which is from Genesis to Malachi. We include the Pesorah, or the Gospels, and the letters of Shaul that he wrote to the churches, and then to Timothy and to Titus, to Philemon. He wrote those letters to them. That is the additions, or the addendum, the additions to Torah, along with the writings of the Hebrews, and then Peter added. And so we have his writings, and then we have James, and then we have Judah or Yehuda. That it's called Jude, but his name was Judah or Yehuda. That was his name, that wrote that short letter. And then we have the Apostle John and his writings and Revelation, and all of that is added to Torah. And so we combine that into Torah. So from start to finish, we go from Genesis all the way to Revelation. And all of that has to be rightly divided. It all has to be rightly divided in order for us to be approved and have an understanding of the times. So when Shaul was writing, and he talked about Moses, and he talked about the prophets, and who else did that? Who else did that? Well, of course, our Messiah. Our Messiah did that. He also talked about Moses' teachings and the prophets. He also talked about it. And so we have to be able to rightly divide it. We have to be able to put the pieces of this together. And you cannot put the pieces together to understand even this day that we're in, and tomorrow and the day after that. You're not going to be able to put all the pieces together if you don't have the writings of Moses, the writings of David, the writings of Samuel, the writings of Solomon, the writings of Isaiah, and all the prophets. You have to be able to piece all of that together to get an understanding of the book. So I want to go to let's go to Proverbs 18 and 21. Let's go to Proverbs 18 and 21. And here it says, death and life are in the power of the tongue, and they that love it shall eat the fruit thereof. Of the writings that we have, it's easy for me and many others, but I'm just going to speak of myself. It's easy for me to take the writings, much of the things that were written, and make a personal application. We have a tendency to do that. That when we open this book, it's the Most High speaking to us. He's speaking to me, and in essence, he is. He is speaking to me individually, but as he's speaking to me individually, what is he saying? There's times where we can take the script, the scriptures of what's being said, and make a personal application, and that's not what it was intended to do. You're gonna get some debate. You're gonna get some debate now. But I do welcome questions. But when we open the book and read, which we are to open up the book and read, that is a command. That's one of his commandments. People say, I ain't got to follow no commandments. One of his commandments was to open up the book and read. So by me faithfully opening up the book and reading it, I'm obeying a commandment. Now, somebody who never opens their book, we ought to really understand how blessed we are. Because for about 12 to 1,500 years, there was no mass production of the book. There was none. It really didn't come out until the 1600s, when you had a printing press, and to where they were able to mass produce it. But before then, there was no printing press. There was no mass production of the word. And the Western history, Western civilization, Western history, and when you talk about Western history, we're not talking about, west of the Atlantic Ocean. Hundreds and hundreds of years ago, when you were speaking of the West, you were speaking of that which went up towards Italy and throughout, Eurasia and Europe. That was considered the West. So for hundreds of years, there was no mass production. So what how did they receive the word? Much of it was word of mouth. You received the word of mouth. And then if you wanted to hear the word, you had to go to what they called cathedrals and places, Orthodox places like that, where it was read in Latin. Sometimes they read it in Greek, but almost all the times they read it in Latin. There was no English, and there was no mass production of the book. So when you look at from like 200, 300 AD or the Common Era, all the way up to 1500 of the Common Era, that whole stretch of period there, there was minimal copies of the Codex, and it was in Greek or Latin. And so when you heard it read publicly, it was read in Latin. And so who actually did the reading? Well, it was very selective. Everybody could not read it. They had selected men that were chosen to read this script in Latin. And if you couldn't understand Latin, or if you couldn't understand Greek, then what did you do? Well, there was some instructions that was given from generation to generation, because that was a part of us. We were to teach our children and teach our children to be teachers of their children. And it was taught from generation down to generation. We didn't see the mass production of this book until, like I said, 1500, 1600, and then it was mass produced in the English language. We are truly enriched, and we should understand the blessedness of being able to go anywhere in our house and open up a book and read. Not only in our house, going to other establishments. You could go to a hotel and open up the book and read. I mean, we have conveniences now that they didn't have for like 1,200, 1,500 years. We don't think, I mean, can you imagine we can't even imagine 50 years, let alone a generation. Oh, there was no mass production of his word for a generation. A generation was lost. No, we're talking 1,200 to 1,500 years. No convenient to open up a book in your dwelling, in your house, wherever you dwell. You didn't have that luxury, where now you have the luxury of just open up the book anytime you want, throughout the day. Go anywhere. You can go to the stores and buy books and buy the Bible. And it's just, we have that convenience now. And with that convenience, instead of having masses reading the book, you still only have a few reading the book. You can go to some people's homes. When was the last time you opened up the book? Oh man, I don't know. It's up there in the closet on the top shelf, or it's back in a cabinet somewhere. Let me knock the dust off of it. What people gave their life, people died, and now we have the convenience of opening up the book anywhere in our house, anytime we want to, and yet we have fewer people reading than when you look at the amount of books that are out there. So we ought to look at ourselves today as being very blessed. We are enriched. And so to whom much is given, what did our Messiah say? To whom much is given, what? Much is required. To whom much is given, much is required. So when you look at what we've been given in our day and in our time, we've been given so much. Do you think he's going to require a little of us? I don't think so. I think he's going to require a lot of us. And what is he requiring of us? And we tend to busy ourselves with some things that if we channeled some of our energy and our time and our creativity to, would really enrich us and our families, and put, how do I want to say, maybe put a few jewels in your crown, or store up things up in heaven to where moth or dust can't get to. When I know that I've been given so much And to whom much is given, much is required. Feet don't fail me now. Heart don't fail me now. Mind don't fail me now. Hands don't fail me now. I mean, I gotta get to work and do my master's bidding. Because a lot of times, be honest with you, your flesh doesn't feel like it. I just don't feel like doing it today. I just don't feel. I can busy myself with a lot of different things. You know, we've got so many different avenues of entertainment. I can just find so many things that I want to do to entertain me, to occupy my mind. I've got an hour to get rid of, so I can just, I can find a lot of different things to just blow an hour. I can just lose an hour with it. We find ourselves easily attracted to things that really don't mean much in the grand scale of things. If you looked at the amount of time that you have in a day, and you look at what the Most High wants of us, and then what society wants of us, and then what does this nation and this culture want of us, then what does and I start to slice up that pie. And when I slice up that pie, I can see who gets the larger part of the pie. And for some of us, the Most High slice of the pie is very small. Everybody else's slice of the pie is huge. And even with the Most High, even with my family, I know what he expects of me and my family. So the time and the energy that I spend into my family, that is pleasing unto him. He doesn't. Any household that is in total disarray, head of household gone, no household at all, children running the house, that's out of order. So as I look at what he wants and what his structure is, and I work to that, to build that structure, then I'm giving him that the slice of the pie that's for him is a little longer, is a little wider. He even tells, he teaches the children, he gives the instruction that children are to take care of parents, especially when they get into their elderly years. When they get into their elderly years, it's up to the children to take care of the parents. Now, if the elderly don't have any children, then yeah, you would go to like the Levites, and you'd go to the priestly tribe. You would go to, and what we call today, you would go to the body of the Mashiach and get some help and some assistance there, because this is like a widower or somebody that doesn't have any children. But if you have children, if they have children, children are supposed to take care of their parents. Well, you have a lot of people that's in that age group now where they're looking for children to take care of them, but there's no children there. Not that they don't have children. They had children, but the children's not there to take care of them. So there was a breakdown. There was a breakdown when the structure of that house was supposed to be built. Because the structure of the house, it begins when the man leaves his father and his mother and he cleaves unto his wife, and they two become one. And then they begin to build a house. And in that structure of building the house and children and raising children and teaching children. And one of the things that we should teach our children from a very young age is commandment number 5. Honor thy father and mother. That's one of the commandments that we should be keeping. I don't care what people say, the commandments are done away to. I don't even listen to that anymore. Anymore, it's like a light feather that just blows in the wind. It appears and blows away. Because he's given us instruction, he's given us commandments, he's given us teaching that we're to follow. So in understanding this book, when I open up the book and I want to make personal application to everything that's written in the book, I have to understand that there's things that's written in the book that's not personal. It's for me to learn and gain from. He's speaking to me about. Because sometimes we open up the book and we think, well, he's speaking to me. He's talking to me. And that is true, That's one way that the Most High can talk to you, is when you open up the book and read. He can talk to you. But he's talking to you about. What is he talking to you about? So when I see Proverbs 18:21, death and life are in the power of the tongue, and they that love it shall eat the fruit thereof. The application immediately, one looks at the things that they say. I can bring death or I can bring life by the things that I say. Oh, really? Oh, really? So you can speak and death comes, or you can speak and life comes. Because that's how we tend to, oh, he's talking to me. This is the Most High talking to me now. And he's telling me death and life is in the power of the tongue. Let's go to John. Let's go to John chapter 5. And let me start with verse 19. Let's go to John 5:19. I'm going to read 19, and there's a lot. I'm not going to unpack all this, but I'm going to read down here. I want to see if you can pick up what he's saying here as I read through here. And then after this, we're going to go to John 11. Then answered Jesus, said unto them, Verily, verily, I say unto you, the Ben can do nothing of himself, but what he seeth Ab do. For what things soever he doeth, these also doeth the Ben likewise. For Ab loveth the Ben, and showeth him all things that himself doeth, and he will show him greater works than these, that ye marvel. I'm kind of chuckling here because I'm looking out here, and we have somebody here, and his name is Ben or Benjamin. He was kind of looking at me like, I don't see my name up there. But the expression on his face. But son, in Hebrew, son is Ben. Ben. So when you're speaking Hebrew and you hear them say Ben Elohim, Ben Adam, Ben Adamim, they're talking the son of. So verse 20, for Ab, or Abba, or the father, and in ancient Hebrew, it was just Ab. In the Masoretic Codex, when the Masoretic Codex got to it, they put Abba. But in the original ancient group or Hebrew lexicon, it's not Abba, it's just Ab. It's the first and second letter of the Hebrew alphabet, and it's pronounced Ab. But the Masoretic Codex, when the Masoretes got a hold of it, they put vowel points on it, and they added the A-B, B-A. They added, and it went from Ab to Abba. And then there's other things that the Masoretic Codex changed the pronunciation of certain words and names. They just changed the pronunciation of it. And they'll tell you, if you do your research and study on it, they'll tell you this is how we pronounce it. They went from the ancient Hebrew and they changed the pronunciation. Not of everything, but there's a number of things that they reproduced and gave phonics to certain things. And then we have more recent history. You have the Yiddish, which is not Hebrew at all. It's just it's a Germanic version of ancient Hebrew, and it's called Yiddish. But in the ancient Hebrew, the name of the father was Ab, just simply Ab. For Ab loveth the Ben, and showeth him all things that himself doeth. And he will show him greater works than these, that ye may marvel. For as Ab raiseth up the dead and quickeneth, even so the Ben quickeneth whom he will. Are you guys getting that? For Ab judgeth no man, but hath committed all judgment unto the Ben, that all should honor the Ben, even as they honor Ab. He that honoreth not the Ben honoreth not Ab, which have sent him. So anybody that doesn't honor the Ben or the Son, if you don't honor the Son, you cannot honor Ab, the Father. The Father ain't putting up with it. You don't honor my Son? What he has given unto the Son, that if you fail to honor the Son, you don't have the Ab. Well, I'm Israelite. It don't matter. Who do you think the Messiah is talking to here? He wasn't talking to Pontius Pilate. He wasn't talking to all the, when the Messiah was speaking here, he was speaking to Israel. He was speaking to Yasharal. And so he's telling Yasharal that all should honor the Son or the Ben, even as they honor Ab. He that honoreth not the Ben honoreth not Ab, which hath sent him. So you can't reject the Son. You can't reject the Ben Elohim. Verse 24, verily, verily, I say unto you, he that heareth my word and believeth on him that sent me hath everlasting life, and shall not come into condemnation, but is passed from death unto life. Verse 25, verily I say unto you, the hour is coming, and now is, when the dead shall hear the voice of the Ben Elohim, and they that hear shall live. For as Ab hath life in himself, so hath he given to the Ben to have life in himself, and have given him authority to execute judgment also, because he is the son of Adam. Verse 28, he goes on to say, marvel not at this. Don't marvel at this. Those who can read it and get an understanding. He says, don't marvel at this. Some people who don't marvel at all, they haven't read it. But those who read it and have an understanding, he says, don't marvel at this. For the hour is coming, in the which all that are in the grave shall hear his voice, and shall come forth. They that have done good unto the resurrection of life, and they that have done evil unto the resurrection of damnation. So let's go back to Proverbs. What does Proverbs 18:21 say? What does Proverbs 18:21 say? Death and life are in the power of the tongue. So is he talking to you as if you have the power, or is he talking to you to get you to understand who has the power? Because some people look at everything that's written, that's written to me, and yeah, he's speaking to you, but he's speaking to you about. He's speaking to you about. It's important to understand that, especially when you get into prophecy, because if you get into prophecy and don't understand that he's speaking to you about, sometimes people think he's just speaking to me and not being able to rightly divide it, and then we come up with all kinds of doctrines. We come up with all kinds of doctrines and all kinds of teaching. So here he says, death and life is in the power of the tongue. So in John, when he says, marvel not, and I'm quoting verse 28, marvel not at this, for the hour is coming, in the which all that are in the graves shall hear his voice. Now, who's in the graves? Who do they put in the grave? You put dead people in graves. You don't, I was getting ready to say, you don't bury people who are alive. But yeah, there's sometimes people, some folks get buried alive, but they don't stay alive. Because if they're not rescued from the grave, they're going to die. You was just buried alive, but you're going to die. So the hour is coming. Everybody in the graves, or all of those who are dead, are going to hear his voice. And I want to go up to, let's go to verse 25. John 5:25. Just go up a few verses. Verily, verily, I say unto you, the hour is coming, and now is, when the dead shall hear the voice of the Ben of Elohim, and they that hear shall live. For as the Ab hath life in himself, so hath he given to the Ben to have life in himself, and have given him authority to execute judgment also, because he is the son of Adam. So why is he giving him judgment? Not to execute, he's giving him the authority to execute judgment. Notice now he uses Ben Elohim, but in verse 27 he's using Ben Adam. Do we know why he's using Ben Adam in verse 27 when all along in these other verses, especially speaking of life and death, he speaks as the Ben Elohim. But when it comes to authorizing judgment, he calls him Ben Adam. I wonder why that is. He doesn't call him Ben Elohim when he's been authorized to give judgment. When he's authorized to give judgment, he's called Ben Adam. And the reason for that is because when he says Ben Adam, that ties him into humanity. He's tied into humanity now. So he has the authority to judge humanity. He's been given that authority to judge humanity, not as Ben Elohim, but as Ben Adam. He's been given that authority. I want to go to John 11. John 11 and let's look at verse 43. John 11:43. And when he thus heard spoken, and when he had thus, and when he thus had spoken, he cried with a loud voice, Lazarus, come forth. And he that was dead came forth, bound hand and foot with grave clothes, and his face was bound about him with a napkin. And Jesus said unto them, loose him and let him go. So in Proverbs, when it says death and life is in the power of the tongue, he was speaking to you about who? Yes. He was speaking to you about Jesus he has the power of death and life within him. Death and life is in the power of his tongue. And when I understand that, then I can eat the fruit thereof and rejoice. Me personally, can't speak nobody back to life. I can't. Don't you know it's in the power of your tongue to speak death and speak life? You cannot with your words. Now, you can influence with your words and maybe influence somebody to get a gun or some type of deadly weapon or something and take somebody's life. But then it's only up to the Most High, because sometimes there's some people, there was a man that was on, I forget what program or something I was watching, and this man had been shot 7 times and was still living. Shot 7 times. And some of the bullets that he received was in his abdomen. And you have some folks get shot once in the abdomen, bleed out and die. And this man was shot 7 times. So even with that, I mean, death and life we cannot speak death and speak life. And now I do believe that we have a subconscious that you got to be careful of some of the things that you say, because you tend to become what you say. What you repeat and think about all the time, you become that. Your the sum manifestation of your reality is the frame of mind that you have. What you think about and what your frame of mind is frames your reality. So if I'm constantly thinking of one thing, that becomes my reality. And and you see it played out in a lot of people. The reason why a lot of people remain in poverty, because when you look at what they're thinking about all the time, and when they keep telling themselves, I'm poor, I'm just a poor man, I'm poor and I'm poor. Well, guess what? They're poor. They're poor. Then you have those who the frame of their mind is rich and success and ambitious and accomplishment. I set goals and I accomplish them, and that's their mindset. Well, then you see what their reality is. So your reality is the sum total of your mindset. So if I kind of change my mindset, what am I going to do? I'm going to change my reality. But looking at Proverbs 18:21, where it says, death and life is in the power of the tongue, this is speaking about our Messiah. Everything, the whole Old Testament, what we call the Old Testament, but the Torah, that which was the Torah and that which is the Torah, he's speaking to us about. He's speaking to us about Israel, about Yasharal. He speaks to us about his son. He speaks to us about the end of the age and the end of the time. He speaks to us about salvation. He speaks to us about the kingdom that's coming. All of that is within Torah. There's things that we learn from, but there's some things you will not change. There's just some things you will not change. Even though people think that they can change and change what's written. Let's look at John. We'll go to John 1:1. John 1:1. In the beginning was the word, or Torah. In the beginning was Torah. And Torah was with Elohim, and Torah was Elohim. So the most high power, the supreme one, his word was with him, or his Torah, that was with him from the very beginning. And you can't separate one from the other. And then down in verse number 14, John 1:14. So let's see what happens to that Torah. Let's look at what happened to that Torah that was with him from the beginning. That is him. That is him. If you don't believe that he is Torah, the Most High, Yah is Torah, and Torah is the Most High Yah. If you don't believe that, then there's really nothing else to talk about. There's not too much to discuss. We can discuss the weather. Man, it's cold outside. Yeah, man, it's cold. It's going to get 10 below 12. The air temperature is going to be 12 below zero today. Yeah, I know. It's going to be 12 below. They give you warnings about when you go outside. You can't stay outside very long. This is a time everybody can mask up when they go outside because it's so cold. Cover up everything. I mean, we could talk about that. There's really not much you can talk about. We can't talk about this if you don't believe the Most High and his word is one. If I can't digest that, and if I can't accept that, then you're not going to accept everything that comes after that. Verse number 14. And Torah, his word, which was with him from the beginning, who he says, this is me. That Torah was made flesh. That Torah was made flesh, and it dwelt among us. So when I see when I read in Deuteronomy, or in even in Deuteronomy, and when I read in Proverbs 18:20, death and life is in the power of the tongue. That became flesh, and it dwelt among us, and we beheld his glory. We seen him speak life. There's a couple of examples in here in the writings that he brings people back from the dead, because death and life is in the power of his tongue. It ain't talking to you. Death and life is in the power of the tongue. That's talking to me. No, he's talking to you about his only begotten that was coming. He was giving him the authority not only to execute judgment, but he placed it in him. He even said, like we read in John, he said that this was given unto me by my Father, by Ab. It was given unto me. So that Torah was made flesh, and it dwelt among us, and we beheld his glory, the glory as of the only begotten of the Abba, only begotten of Ab, full of grace and truth. So the only begotten, you might as well just close the book up if you don't believe that the Son is the only begotten of the Father. There's not too much else to discuss, because the whole book was written about him. The Torah became flesh. When Moses wrote, when Abraham was called out from his family, when he was called out from his family, from his father's house, do we know why he was called out from his father's house? They were idolaters. They were idolaters, and so he called them out from idolaters. Get out from your family. It was his only begotten son, because he certainly wasn't talking to y'all, because y'all can't leave nobody. You can have idols up in the house. Oh, I can't leave. I know it's idol worship, but I have no welfare. Who gonna take care of me? I mean, we make up all these excuses, but if he tells us we're not to commit idolatry, that's it. That's it. Through faith, I understand that he's going to provide for me. He's going to provide for me. I'm not going to put up. So the whole book, when you look at Abraham being called out from his family because they were idolaters, and Abraham had within himself, I know they're idolaters, but I ain't taking no part of it. I just ain't doing it. And he became the friend of the Most High Yah. So when the Most High Yah told him, Abraham, I see your heart. I know you see all this idolatry going on, even in your daddy's house, all this idolatry, and you don't want no part of it. Come on out. Come on out. I'm gonna make a nation out of you, because you had it within yourself. You didn't want to worship the idolatry of mama and daddy and all your kinfolk. So that was written about Abraham and what Abraham and his calling out, and then what was given unto Abraham. What was given unto Abraham. The first thing that he gave unto Abraham was he was going to bless his seed and make a great nation out of him. And Abraham and Sarah was old in years and had been married a long time. And you know they try to have kids, because he even brought somebody in his house to be his son, who was Eliezer. He said, he is of my house. At one time, when he was fruitless through Sarah, he says, let Eliezer be my son, and the blessings going on. He said, no, I'm going to give you a son of your own seed through Sarah. So the promises that was given unto Abraham, the writings that we see from his son Isaac and from being passed down to Jacob or Jacob, and then down to the 12 tribes. All of that is written in Torah. And if I don't understand that all of that was made flesh, what is he telling me about Abraham? What is he telling me about, I'm going to be rich as my father Abraham? Not exactly. That's not what the book is saying. When the book gets into the wrong hands of people, and that's why a lot of people get gravitated to motivational speeches and motivational speakers, and you see a lot of the gathering of huge churches and everything. It's because there's motivational speakers up there that's able to draw people into them. And some of the largest churches that you find, ain't none of them speaking about salvation. They're not speaking about salvation. They're speaking more on motivational living and principles of motivation, and they take things out of this book that people try to apply to their life. You got some folks that are born into certain families and certain societies and certain cultures. It don't matter. They're already gonna have certain things in life. They're already gonna have, whether they have a motivational speaker or not. They're already gonna have certain things. You got some folks, those who are born into the Hunt family. Do you think they have to tell them, hey, no, think and grow rich? They're in the Hunt family, in the Bush family. Think and grow rich. You ain't got to tell them. They already rich. They already have it. There's a lot of families and foundations in this country that people are born into. You don't have to tell them think and grow rich. They already rich. You don't have to tell them be positive thinkers and name it and claim it. They don't have to name it and claim it. They name it and buy it. If I want it, I'll just go buy it. But we use those type of principles to gather a lot of people together, and we plant all of this stuff in them so that they think everything in this book is talking to me. Yeah, it's talking to you about. It's talking to you about. Death and life is in the power of the tongue. He's talking to me about the Messiah it's been given unto him that death and life is in the power of his tongue. He can speak life and he can speak death. So let's look at Matthew 7 and Matthew 7 and let's look at verse 22, 7:22. 20. Let's look at 7:21 and I'll read down to 23. Not everyone that saith unto me, Master, Master, shall enter into the kingdom of heaven, but he that doeth the will of my Ab, which is in heaven. Many will say to me in that day, Master, Master, have we not prophesied in thy name, and in thy name have cast out devils, and in thy name done many wonderful works? And then will I profess unto them, I never knew you. Depart from me, ye that work iniquity. So when he speaks, depart from me, ye that work iniquity. And we also read in John in chapter 5, where he says all those who are dead are going to come back, right? Some unto the resurrection of life, and some unto the resurrection of damnation or death. Some unto the resurrection of damnation. But they're all going to come back because life and death is in the power of his tongue. And when he professed unto them, I never knew you, depart from me, ye that work iniquity or lawlessness, he's speaking death. Now you're going to die. He can speak a natural death, but at the end, he's speaking of the death or the damnation. And when he speaks that death, there's no coming back from that. There's actually absolutely no coming back from when he speaks death unto them. So he says, depart from me, ye that work iniquity. I really never knew you. I really never knew you, because anybody that is lawless is is not somebody that he knows, doesn't have that personal relationship with him. Because when you look at, let's go to 2 Timothy 2:19. The second letter to Timotheus, chapter 2, verse 19. Nevertheless, the foundation of Yah standeth sure, having this seal. Yah knoweth them that are his. And let every one that nameth the name of Christ depart from lawlessness or iniquity. He knows those that are his. How does he know those that are his? They have the Spirit of Christ, and they're not lawless, or they are obedient unto him. And let everyone that nameth the name of Christ depart from iniquity or lawlessness. So somebody that's in iniquity or somebody that's lawless, he doesn't know them. He doesn't have that relationship with them. He's not going to have a relationship with somebody that is lawless. So let's look at that. What is that? I'm looking in the Greek text. In the Greek text, and it's G93, and it calls this, because there's different. We have one English word, iniquity, and we like to stamp it on everything, like we do a lot of words in the Bible. There's a lot of words in the sacred scriptures. We put one word to mean, but when you look at the context in it's used, there's different definitions, but we like to just use one word. And when we use one word, we tend to have one definition. But here it's talking G93. It's dealing with injustice. The quality, by implication, the act, moral wrongfulness of character, life, or act. Iniquity, unjust, unrighteousness, wrong. So anybody that doesn't exercise justice or that which is legal, and you don't produce that, or you don't walk in that which is legal, then that is you're being in iniquity. And I see a lot of, in this context of this verse, I see a lot of that. I see a lot of injustice. It's all over the place. A lot of injustice. So anybody that is in Christ is not going to be unjust. Anybody that's in Christ is going to exercise justice. That goes along with Isaiah chapter 9 and verse number 7. Let's look at Isaiah 9 and 7. Anybody that is not practicing justice is not a part of him. We've seen that, right? Of the increase of his government and peace there shall be no end upon the throne of Daud and upon his kingdom, to order it and to establish it with judgment and with justice from henceforth even forever. And the zeal of the Most High Yah of hosts will perform this. So in his kingdom, what establishes his kingdom is judgment and justice. That establishes his kingdom. So anybody that is not just, or somebody who is unjust, is really not in his kingdom. Is really not a part of him. And that's why he said, I know those who have my seal. Isn't that what we read in Timothy? In 2 Timothy 2:9? 2:19, he says, this is the foundation of Yah, and it has his seal. So what is the seal of the Most High? When you look at the foundation that he is establishing it, didn't he say in Isaiah 9:7 to establish it, right? His kingdom, his foundation, he's going to establish it, he's going to order it, and he's going to order it and establish it with what? Justice and judgment. That's his seal. That is his seal. So if you see any kind of organizational body, whether it's a government, a nation, or anything, that doesn't have judgment and justice, they don't have his seal. They're not sealed by him. So when I look at nations that are unjust and there's no justice, they don't have his seal. And I know, we like to be called, you know what we like to be called in this country? This is a Christian nation. That's what it likes to be called. We're a Christian nation. And I find that interesting because one of the laws on the books is a separation of church and state. But anytime you have an election and they're sworn into office, what are they sworn in on? I thought there's supposed to be a separation of church and state. They say one thing and do another because you got the Bible that they're sworn in on. You hear a lot of them talking about the teachings of Christ and everything. But the only thing that has his seal are those who live in justice and judgment. So let's see where he lives. In the prophet Jeremiah chapter 4 and verse number 2. We might as well read verse 1. That verse 1's a good one too. If thou wilt return, O Yasharal, saith Yah, return unto me. And if thou wilt put away thine abominations out of my sight, then shalt thou not remove. And thou shalt swear, Yah liveth. So where does he live? In truth, in judgment, and in righteousness. And the nations shall bless themselves in him, and in him shall they glory. So if there is a nation that has his seal, like he says, I know those who are mine and those who have my seal, they live in truth, judgment, and righteousness, and they glory in him because that's where he lives. That's where he is. So if there's no truth, you don't have his seal. If there's no justice, you don't have his seal. If there's no judgment, you don't have his seal. If there's no righteousness, you don't have his seal. Now, you can talk about it all day long, but he knows those who are his. He knows those. So big words, a flowery verbosity, charisma, the ability to draw large crowds of people. He don't live in none of that if there's no truth, judgment, righteousness, and he's going to establish his foundation on justice and truth. That's where it's established. So this is a part of him. When we say he became flesh or the word became flesh, so where do you think our Messiah stands? What do you think his foundation is? How do you think he's going to establish his kingdom? Where do you think he is going to reside? Where do you find his spirit? Where are you going to find that? Because all of that was made flesh. and it dwelt among us, and we beheld it. First John says we handled the word of life. We were able to be amongst him. We heard his voice. We heard his teaching. Peter walked on water, like Jesus was walking on water. Peter walked on water until he lost sight, and he seen he was walking on water. Then he got afraid and he lost faith. But he walked on water. We handled him. We seen the miracles that he taught. We seen the blind receiving sight. We seen the maimed and the halt. We seen devils come out of people. We seen people come back from the dead. All of that is in the Word and in our Messiah, in Christ, in the Mashiach. All of that is in him because that was made flesh and it dwelt among us. Let's see what else dwelt among us. Let's go to Isaiah chapter 43 and verse number 1. But now thus saith Yah thy that created thee. But now thus saith Yah that created thee. O Yaakov, and he that formed thee. O Yasharal, fear not, for I have redeemed thee, and I have called thee by thy name. Thou art mine. That was made flesh, and it dwelt among us. And we beheld his glory as of the only begotten of the Father, full of grace and truth. Many people love to quote that word, but they don't want to take everything that comes with it. It's like when we look at certain scriptures. Here's another one. Before I get into that, let's go to another one. Let's go to another one. Psalms 91 and let's look at verse 10 and 11 and 12. This is something we read. We've been reading a lot. For a while there, we was reading it every day, and we read it a lot. We had a corporate or a unity prayer, beginning of your morning, 6 a.m., and then the beginning of the night at 6 p.m. And we had a unity prayer praying for divine instruction and divine protection. That was up until January 25th. Was it January 20th? I think it was January 20th. But yeah, we was doing that up until January 20th. But we still, though there's still some that are still doing it, 6 a.m. we rise up. We start the day because the day starts at 6 a.m. We rise up and we have prayer at 6 a.m. There's a unity prayer. And at 6 p.m., you have some that are still doing that unity prayer. Now, we have some that have dropped off that that was just up until January 20th. And so January 20th has passed, so we're not doing that prayer now. Do you think the Messiah is pleased if you ain't praying at all? Because he said in St. Luke 18:1 that men ought to always pray and not faint. And he even came back and said, when he comes back on earth, will he find faith? So it takes faith to pray. So if you ain't praying, you ain't hardly got no faith. You might have fainted. Men should always pray and not faint. And it's hard for us to ridicule and talk about other people that have a prayer regimen, very regiment in prayer. And it's hard for us to talk about them and enter into a seat of judgment against them, and we don't pray. I mean, it's the haughtiness or the self-pride of some people that can talk about other people and ridicule them, talk them down, and they have a regimen of prayer, and you don't have prayer, but you're going to judge them and talk them down. Oh, they ain't saved. They ain't saved. Well, maybe you ain't saved. You ain't praying, maybe you ain't saved. We're so quick to judge. And Jesus said in John 7:24, he said, judge not according to appearance, but judge righteous judgment. So before I judge anybody, I have to examine myself first. I got to examine myself first before I pronounce judgment on anybody. Because he even he says, if there's any teacher or preacher or anybody enter into judgment to judge on a certain sin and you commit the same sin, then what did he call that? Huh? I thought I heard somebody say it. It's, huh? It is a hypocrite, and because he even said the Pharisees were like that. They were in hypocrisy. He called them. He wasn't afraid to call them hypocrites. They were in hypocrisy. But what did he call it in Romans? I think it's the second chapter, where he talks about if you're gonna call or you're gonna preach on somebody who steals, and you a stealer, and you're gonna preach on somebody or you're gonna teach on somebody that's committing sin, and you committing the same sin. Remember he said that? No, maybe we ought to. Yeah. Let's look at Romans chapter 2. Let's look at Romans chapter 2 and 1. He says, thou art inexcusable, O man, whosoever thou art that judges, for wherein thou judgest another, thou condemnest thyself. For thou that judgest doest the same things. So really, you can't talk about anybody or enter into the seat of judgment. Oh, they ain't saved. And you doing the same thing? Let's look at verse 2. But we are sure that the judgment of God is according to truth. Why do you think it's according to truth? Because he lived, like we read in the prophet Jeremiah. Where does he live? In truth and in judgment and in righteousness. That's where he lives. Against them which commit such thing. And thinkest thou this, O man, that judgest them which do such things, and doest the same, that thou shalt escape the judgment of Yah? So if we're going to judge against somebody and we're doing the same things, do you think you're going to escape judgment yourself? Or despisest thou the riches of his goodness and forbearance and long suffering, not knowing that the goodness of Yah leadeth thee to repentance? There was, I wanted, there's a scripture, I thought it was right in here. It's probably in here somewhere. I probably just need to keep reading. But he talks about how it is sacrilege to enter into judgment against somebody, and you're doing the same thing. Okay, it's down in verse 21, 2:21. Thou therefore which teachest another, teachest thou not thyself? Which means if you're teaching another, you're teaching yourself first. If you're teaching another. Thou that preachest a man should not steal. Are you going to steal? Thou that sayest a man should not commit adultery, does thou commit adultery? Thou that abhorrest idols, does thou commit sacrilege? So if you're preaching against idolatry or any sin, thou shalt not have idols, thou shalt not commit adultery, thou shalt not steal, thou shalt not. If you're teaching any of those, and you're teaching against idols, but you got idols, that's sacrilege. Thou that makest thy boast of the law, through breaking the law dishonorest thou Yahuwah. Yah. For the name of Yah is blasphemed among the Gentiles through you, as it is written. So you had, and what Shaul was talking about, you had those who were supposed to be the teachers of the law, the teachers. They were the of Israel. You're teaching the law, but then you're going out and breaking it yourself. He says, how are you going to escape? How are you going to escape the judgment that's coming? And they're not going to escape it. In fact, he goes on to say that his name is what? What does verse 24 say? His name is what? Blaspheme. You done blaspheme my name among the Gentiles. Because when you're supposed to be teachers of this, and anybody that's teaching this, and you're doing the same thing, you're blaspheming his name. So be careful when you want to judge somebody. Be very careful. And that's why Jesus said in John 7:24, when Jesus said in John 7:24, he says, judge not according to appearance. Don't judge according to appearance. Because you know, a lot of us, certain folk look a certain way and we immediately enter into judgment. Immediately. You might have somebody that wears, a head covering, and immediately we go into judgment. You got some folks that wear, when you look at Israel and the priests and the garments and everything that they had to wear, and they had to wear head coverings and they wore their garments. If we see men with head coverings today, some people immediately go into judgment and start running for shelter. I'm running for the what do you call the bomb places to protect you from bombs? Bomb shelter. I'm running for the bomb shelter. It gets so ingrained into you. I took a flight. I'm trying to remember where I flew to. This was years ago. Probably back in early 2000s, maybe 2010, somewhere around there, years ago. And I got on this plane. It was in Chicago. And so I got on the plane, and when I boarded the plane, I was walking in the plane, and towards the back of the plane was a man with a turban on. And my heart just started beating real fast. Because you know what I thought of? A bomb, a terrorist. Just by looking at him. I didn't know the man. And I first seen him, and my thought came to my mind, I hope that's not where I have to sit. And I was looking at my ticket, and I actually sat in front of him because he was further in the back of the plane. But in my mind and in my heart started racing. My mind says, oh no, he's going to hijack the plane. I hope there's not a bomb in the plane. Where did I get that from? It was ingrained in me. It was taught in me. They put that fear in me that if anybody's wearing a turban or a head covering or something, they're terrorists. That was put in me. And so I felt that way, and I entered into judgment. Quickly went into judgment. And that's how we do a lot of times. We look at people and the very appearance of them, and we immediately start entering into judgment. Immediately. And Jesus said, don't judge according to appearance, but you have to judge righteous judgment. And then you have, and for a teacher or anybody to teach on prayer and don't pray, and then you're going to teach on somebody who has a regimen of prayer. They might pray 3 times a day, but you're steadily talking about them, and you don't pray once a day. So you can't, you have to have righteous judgment. We fear the wrong people. If you really look at it, we fear the wrong people. But we're taught who to fear. We're taught who to fear, and we're taught who to trust. It's ingrained in us. This is the person you trust. This is the person you don't trust. And that's ingrained in us. And it's going to kill a lot of folks. It has already killed folks. So I want to go back to Psalms 91. Psalms 91 and verse number 10. I'm going to read 10, 11, and 12. There shall no evil befall thee, neither shall any plague come nigh thy dwelling. And like I said, we read the book and he's speaking to us, right? But he's speaking to us about. So you have to know how to rightly divide this. For he shall give his angels charge over thee to keep thee in all thy ways. They shall bear thee up in their hands, lest thou dash thy foot against a stone. Okay? Now, let's go to Matthew chapter 4. And let's look at verse number 5. Matthew 4 and 5. Then the devil taketh him up into the holy city and setteth him on a pinnacle of the temple, and saith unto him, If thou be the Ben Elohim, cast thyself down, for it is written, He shall give his angels charge concerning thee, and in their hands they shall bear thee up, lest at any time thou dash thy foot against a stone. Did we just read that? Jesus saith unto him, It is written again, Thou shalt not tempt Yah thy Elohim. So in Psalm, when you look at Psalms, let's go back to Psalms 91, 11 and 12. For he shall give his angels charge over thee to keep thee in all thy ways. They shall bear thee up in their hands, lest thou dash thy foot against a stone. So was he talking to the reader, or was he talking to the reader about his son? He's talking to the reader about his son. I'm going to tell you what's going to happen with my son, but I'm speaking it to you now so that when it happens, you should already know that there's many things he's written into his word talking to us about what's going to happen. I'm telling you what's going to happen, but we get misguided into thinking, okay, he's talking to me, and that's where we leave it. Oh, he's talking to me, and we leave it just there. But when you rightly divide it, yeah, I am talking to you, but I'm talking to you about my Ben and what's going to happen. One more in Psalms 22 and verse number 1, because have you ever wondered how King David, how the Spirit ministered to him to where he spoke so much? And sometimes we think he's talking about himself, and then there's times where we know he can't be talking about himself. He's got to be talking about who is he talking about? Some people might think, well, who is the king talking about here? Because he can't be talking about himself. So in 22 and 1, he says, Elohim, Elohim, why hast thou forsaken me? Why art thou so far from helping me, from the words of my roaring? O my Elohim, I cry in the daytime, but thou hearest not, and in the night season, and am not silent. So when we read this, we're reading what David wrote. Is he speaking to me, or is he speaking to me about? because there's things written in the scripture, and when it gets into the wrong hands, people use it for their agenda. They can use it for their agenda because they say, see, he's talking to me, and this is what he's saying. Well, yeah, he is talking, and you are the audience, so you're listening, but who is he talking about? And then what is the end result? What is the end result? Because we can go to other scriptures and things that's written, especially in the prophets, and people say, see, he's talking to me, but he's talking to you about what is going to happen. And if we don't get the understanding and rightly divide it, like we brought out already in 2 Timothy 2 and 15, and he tells us that, didn't we read that? Where he says you have to rightly divide the word of truth. So there is a right way of dividing this and putting all the pieces together. Because here in Psalms 22, he's talking about the Messiah and the Messiah on the cross. And even when the Messiah, and he said he cried in the daytime and in the night season, and there's many times where he cried out to his Father. At one time he cried out and say, Abba, Abba, if it be possible, let this cup pass from me. It says in Hebrews that they witnessed him crying, and the sweat off of his brow was like great drops of blood, and he was heard in that he cried. So we know he was crying out to him, and he wanted to be free of this. And when you read this Psalms here, and you can hear our Messiah crying out to his Father. So he's talking to me about his son. Just like in Psalms 91, he's talking to me about his son. Now I can read that and get an understanding. I can say the prayer and ask him. Now, I don't have 1,000 people dying by my side, or 10,000 by my right side, by my right hand. 1,000 folks dying over here, 10,000 folks dying over here. I don't have that. I don't have that. But there's coming a day when our Messiah is going to come. Let's look at Isaiah. Let's look at Isaiah. Isaiah 63, and I'm going to start with verse 1. I think I'm going to read down at least 3. We'll see. Okay. Isaiah 63 and 1. Who is this that cometh from Edom with dyed garments from Basra? This that is glorious in his apparel, traveling in the greatness of his strength. I that speak in righteousness, mighty to save. Isaiah 63 and 1. Wherefore art thou red in thine apparel? Now notice he says in verse 1, this that is glorious in his apparel. So now they're going to ask him about his apparel. Wherefore art thou red in thine apparel, and thy garments like him that treadeth in the wine fat? Verse 3, I have trodden the winepress alone, and of the people there was none with me. For I will tread them in my anger and trample them in my fury, and their blood shall be sprinkled upon my garments, and I will stain all my raiment. Wow. Did you hear that? That don't sound like somebody coming back with a smiley face. It don't sound like it. first off, in the verse 1, it says his garments were glorious. Then in verse 2, they asked the question, well, how are they so red? I mean, your garments are red. It's like you're in the wine vat or you're treading in the wine press. When they treaded in the wine press, I don't have it in its entirety, in its detail, but you would have all these grapes in a wine press, and they would have people that would walk in this wine press. Sometimes they go round in circles. You'd have more than one person, but they'd all be walking around in circles trying to get all the grapes smashed. And then once the grapes were smashed, and then you had the juice that came out of and it would go into a trough, and the juice would run out of the trough down into these barrels. Anyway, that was the wine press, where they would wine press it out. But in trading in the wine press, all of these grapes, squishing all these grapes, the splatter, it would splash, and you would have all the splatter, and it would get all on their garments. And you could tell when people I seen you was in the wine press today. Yeah, I just got done. I came out of the wine press. Yeah, it was a long day. It was a laboring day. And their garments would be stained, and it would look like red wine. And the staining of the garment. Well, he says here, he tells you, yeah, my garments are red. He says, and of the people there was none with me, for I will tread them in my anger and trample them in my fury, and their blood shall be sprinkled upon my garments, and I will stain all my raiment. For the day of vengeance is in my heart, and the year of my redeemed is come. Now, this is not so much of a prophecy that you will hear in churches. They don't want to preach this as prophecy because this is talking about a day of redemption, And we normally like to speak on the day of our redemption. Let's go to Romans. Let's go to Romans 13, and let's look at verse 11. And that knowing the time, and that it is high time, that now is high time to awake out of sleep. For now is our salvation nearer than when we believe. The night is far spent, the day is at hand. Let us therefore cast off the works of darkness, and let us put on the armor of light. That's really not the verse I wanted. I wanted the verse, it might be in Ephesians, where it talks about the day of your redemption is nigh. I think that might be in Ephesians. Somebody can find that. But the day of redemption, when we think about the day of redemption, we're not thinking of the day of redemption through the eyes of the prophets, through the word that was made flesh and dwelt among us. Because when you look at Isaiah 63, that's talking about our Messiah that is going to come. And in his return, he's going to be in the wine press. He's going to press it out. And it says he trod it in the wine press alone. He's the one that's going to have the blood upon his garments. And okay, I'm going back to Isaiah 63, and we read verse 4. For the day of vengeance is in mine heart, and the year of my redeemed is come. So the coming of the redemption and the day of redemption, and that day is drawing nigh. And in prophecy, as it's speaking to us about our Messiah and our Savior that is going to come in that day of redemption and how it's going to look. This is how it's going to look in the day of his redemption. When he comes back, he says he's going to come back in his anger. I don't know if I want to see him in his anger. I don't know if I want to see him treading out the winepress. I don't know if I want to see him getting his garments splattered with blood. I don't know if I want to see that. And that's why when we read in Psalms 91, where it says, 1,000 shall fall on my side and 10,000 on my right hand. That's because when he's treading out that winepress, you mean the Messiah is going to come and slay a lot of people? That's what the prophecy is telling us. But that's not what we hear. We don't hear that, especially when it comes to Sunday morning preaching. And a lot of the preaching in the church, we don't hear that kind of message because that's not the kind of message that we want to hear when it comes to judgment. When he comes to execute judgment on the earth, when he comes to execute judgment against his enemies. No, I don't know, Hazel. I think you kind of gotten off. That's not something that we hear. We want to hear. We want to hear of "Oh Happy Day." "Oh Happy Day," and how I'm going up yonder, and how I'm going to escape all of this. Because in prophecy, he speaks to us about what's going to happen. And we can't turn our head to it. We can't turn our head and say, "Oh, no, that's not going to happen. That's not going to happen." Or what we say is, "Well, yeah, that's going to happen, but I'm not going to be here to see it." Where are you going to be? You might be in the grave. You might be in the grave, because between now, remember he said the year of his redeemed is come. So there's a time and a season where this is the year, this is the time, this is the season for his redeemed. And if we're not a part of that redeemed to where he's going to cover us and put us in a place of refuge, if we're not a part of that, yeah, you're going to witness a lot of things. There's going to be a lot of things that we're going to witness that is going to be surprising to a lot of people. Surprising to a lot of people. So in Isaiah, I'm going to go to Isaiah. Let's look at Isaiah 56, and I'm going to start at verse number 1. 56 and 1. "Thus saith Yah, keep ye judgment and do justice, for my salvation is near to come, and my righteousness to be revealed. Blessed is the man that doeth this, and the Son of Man that layeth hold on it, that keepeth the Sabbath from polluting it, and keepeth his hand from doing any evil." Again, the Word was made flesh. So all of this that we're reading about came unto us. "Neither let the son of the stranger that hath joined himself to Yah speak, saying, Yah hath utterly separated me from his people. Neither let the eunuch say, Behold, I'm a dry tree." So the stranger, notice what he says here, the stranger that hath joined himself unto Yah. Don't let him say he's utterly separated me from his people. Because in his people, not only do you have Yasharah, but you have strangers. You have those that have been joined unto him. Because that is where safety is going to be. I'm going to come back here. I might be getting ahead of myself. You can tell me if I am. I'm going to come back here. But let's go to Romans 11. Romans 11 and verse number... I want to read 26. Can we go up to verse 25? For I would not, brethren, that ye should be ignorant of this mystery, lest ye should be wise in your own conceits, that blindness in part is happened to Yasharal until the fullness of the Gentiles be come in. So there's Gentiles that's coming into Israel. There's Gentiles coming into Israel. There's the stranger that is coming in. There's the grafting in. Where is the grafting in taking part? You have the wild tree, which is what? Grafted in to Israel. And then after he gets all of the olive tree or the wild branches grafted into Israel, like it says, until all the Gentiles be come in, the fullness of the Gentiles come in. Once he gets them grafted into Israel, and then what does he say in verse 26? And so all Israel shall be saved, as it is written, there shall come out of Zion the deliverer, and shall turn away ungodliness from Jacob. Strangers being grafted in, Gentiles being grafted into Israel, because that's where the refuge is. That's where safety is. That's where everybody who wants to escape the coming judgment upon this world and upon nations. If you want to escape the coming judgment on nations, you have to get in Israel or the body. This is his nation. This is his people. This is his body. Because that's where Israel's going to be saved. Zechariah chapter 8 and verse number 23. Zechariah 8:23. Thus saith Yahweh of hosts, in those days it shall come to pass that 10 men shall take hold out of all languages of the nations, even shall they take hold of the skirt of him that is a Yahudim, saying, we will go with you, for we have heard Elohim is with you. So the strangers, like we read in Isaiah 56, he was telling the strangers, I don't want you to think that you're not, I've forsaken you. I don't want you to think that I've forsaken you or that you're not a part. I don't want you to think that. Because those who have been grafted in, those who have made a part of Israel, he's coming in the day of redemption. That's who he's going to save. That's why he said all Israel. So if I'm not in Israel, there's not going to be any salvation. Okay. John, let's look at John. Am I going too fast? John 4:22. John 4:22. Ye worship ye know not what. We know what we worship, for salvation is of the Jews or the Yahudim. That's where salvation is. That's why in Zechariah it says we got to cleave to them. We've got to be a part of them because we know that's where the Most High is at. The Most High. Wait a minute, time out. Wait a minute. I thought you said he's in the church. Well, everybody who's born again of water and spirit is put into his body. I got to rehearse some of this. In Romans, it says that we are buried with him into baptism, right? We're buried with him into baptism. So we become a part of him in baptism. That's what you're baptized into. Everybody who gets baptized is baptized into Christ. You're baptized into his body. So who is he? Who is Christ? Who is he a son of? He's a son of the Most High, and he's a son of Adam. He's of the tribe of Judah, of the seed of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. That's who he is. So when I get baptized into Christ, I'm baptized into his body. I become a part of his body and who he is. And that's why he said that's where salvation is. You guys don't know what you're worshiping, but we know what we worship because this is where salvation is. He said it throughout the prophets where salvation was going to be. But when I look at the prophets and I see the prophets speaking to me and I leave it there, I don't see that the prophets are speaking to me about. And that's where we get misplaced a lot of time, because the prophets is speaking to me about the Messiah and about what's going to happen. That's what they're speaking to me about. Galatians 3:27. For as many of you as have been baptized into Christ hath put on Christ. As many as have been baptized in Christ. So when we read in Zechariah 8:23, how many languages did they say? Men of how many different languages? Of 10 different languages. There was men of 10 different languages, which means that there's different nations, because nations have languages. Usually a nation has its language. In France, what do you speak? French. In Italy, I'm throwing it. What do you speak? I don't know. What do they speak? Italian. Okay. Speak Italian. In Russia, you speak Russian. In Germany, you speak German. So you talk about 10 different nations. In England, you speak English. United States, you speak English. So out of these different nations, you have languages. But he said 10 languages. So you got 10 different nations that are going to come and say, we know where the Most High is. We read that in Zechariah 8:23. We know where the Most High is. And that's where we're going to cleave. We're going to cleave to them. As many as have been baptized into Christ have put on Christ. There is neither Jew nor Greek. There is neither bond nor free. There is neither male nor female. For ye are all one in Christ Jesus. And if ye be Christ, then are ye Abraham's seed and heirs according to the promise. That's where the redeemed are going to be at the time that he comes to tread out the winepress. If you're not in Christ, if you're not in Israel, if you're not in the body, you're not going to make it. You're going to be on the outside. You're going to be on the outside. So if anybody's telling you that they're in a body and that body is not a part of Israel, then you got the wrong doctrine. And you better be careful, because we're winding up. This thing is winding up. We're looking at a nation that's divided, and this nation is going to stay divided. It ain't over. It is not over. What we just witnessed in the last few months, it is not over. In fact, as they try and attempt to govern, and you're going to see that there's there's going to be a split in this government. It's coming. It's coming. The handwriting's on the wall. It's coming. So we're seeing the end time coming together right before our eyes. But we have to understand that those things that are written to us, we have to understand why it was written to us, who is it talking about, and what is it telling us? Who is it talking about? Who is it written to? And what is it telling us? And then when I hear his voice, then I'm going to do what he said. Because I know where salvation is. I know where salvation is. Just like Jesus. Where did Jesus say salvation was? Of the Yahudim. So if somebody stands up and tells you, no, that's not where salvation, all you got to do is take them to John 4:22. Are you going to listen to the words of the one who authored this? I mean, he's the author. What did we read in Hebrews, the 12th chapter, where he says he's the author and finisher of our faith. So he's the author of this, and he tells you where salvation is, but you're going to believe somebody else who says, oh, no, that's not where salvation is. Salvation is here. So am I going to believe what the author says about salvation, Or am I going to believe somebody else that has their own doctrine? There's a lot of things that we're off base on. I'm sorry to say it, but we do have the birthright. You hear what I'm saying? We do have the birthright because it is. He told them you have to repent and be baptized in Jesus' name, be filled with His Spirit. We have the birthright. But any kind of teaching that's absent of what the prophets teach us, especially Christ, He was the last prophet. The last prophet to speak unto us was our Messiah. And so if I'm following a doctrine that is separate from what the Messiah gave me, and He spoke it unto us, if I don't understand that the word that was spoken throughout all the prophets, that became flesh, and we witnessed it, but then you're not going to believe anybody who says they don't believe the prophets, they don't believe the word. So if you don't believe the prophets, you don't believe the word. And if you don't believe the word, then you're going to be on the outside when that time of redemption comes. When He comes back, He has a place and a shelter for His people, but He's coming back to execute judgment and justice against nations. He's coming back to establish His kingdom. What do you mean He's coming back? Because that's what is in the prophets. So as we read the prophets, we have to understand what he is saying, what the prophet is saying, who the prophet is speaking to, and what the prophet is speaking about. Because it can be misguided, and we think that the prophet is speaking just to us. And then it's misguided because we're not listening to what he is speaking about. Just like it says in Proverbs 18:21, death and life is in the power of the tongue. I don't have the power to speak death or life. What that verse was saying was, Christ is the one that has the power of death and life in his tongue. He had to tell me that. But we can skew, and like we do a lot of the messages that's written in the text, we get skewed and think it's talking about something else. Now, who does that diverting? I wonder who does that diverting. Well, let's see who does that diverting. Matthew 4. Yeah, halal. Let's go to Matthew 4:4. We might as well just go up to, let's go to verse 1. Then was Jesus led up of the Spirit into the wilderness to be tempted of the devil, Satan. And when he had fasted 40 days and 40 nights, he was afterward a-hungered. And when the tempter came to him, he said, if thou be the Son or the Ben Elohim, command that these stones be made bread. But he answered and said, it is written, man shall not live by bread alone, but by every word that proceedeth out of the mouth of Yah. So I wonder where the divergence comes from. I wonder how do people get deviated from the very word that became flesh? I wonder who does that. Well, he tells it right here. Then the devil taketh him up into the holy city and setteth him on a pinnacle of the temple and saith unto him, if thou be Ben Elohim, cast thyself down, for it is written, he shall give his angels charge concerning thee, and in their hands they shall bear thee up, lest at any time thou dash thy foot against a stone. And Jesus said unto him, it is written again. I'm coming back to you again. It is written again, thou shalt not tempt Yah thy Elohim. So the divergence comes from the devil himself is able to bring in a divergence or cause somebody to deviate from the path and the word that was already given unto us. So when the prophets are already telling us, and Moses and David and Solomon and everything that was wrote was telling us about the future events. Even in Genesis, the end was determined in the book of Genesis. He has declared the end from the very beginning. So when I read Genesis chapter 49, and I read what's going to happen in the latter days, what he says is what's going to happen in my future. It hasn't even come to pass yet. In Genesis 49, he's talking about the latter days. Those things were going to happen in the latter days. So for us to think that he's not going to deal at all with Israel or those who are in Israel, he's not going to protect them, he's not going to keep them while he's executing judgment on these nations, there's been a divergence somewhere. Somebody has deviated from what was given unto the prophets to tell us about the future and to tell us about what's going to happen. We've taken the word, there's a lot of things in the scriptures we've taken to mean just us. And we have to understand that he's teaching us about what's going to happen. He taught us in scripture about the Messiah, about his power, about what he was going to do. But many times we get diverted and we think, oh, that's talking to me. Well, in a sense, he's talking to you, but he's talking to you about what's going to happen. He's telling you, I'm going to tell you what's going to happen. So when I look at death and life is in the power of his tongue, all of a sudden I'm getting more alarmed. And as much as I've been reading Psalms 91, and I've been reading it a lot, and it seems like the more I read it and just let it saturate, there's some interesting things he says in there that, and I think the more you read scripture and understand who he's talking about, the more enlightenment that you'll get, the more understanding that you'll get. But you have to know who he's talking about. Because if you read scripture and you don't know who he's talking about, then you're going to be in darkness. But when you know who he's talking about, then it brings out a little bit more light, a little bit more understanding. To be honest with you, compiling this whole book together and getting a more understanding of scripture, when I read Psalms 91, I see a little bit more light. I see a little bit more light in Psalms 91. I wonder why. You ask yourself, I gave y'all assignment. Didn't I give y'all assignment? Isaiah 44. I gave y'all that assignment, Isaiah 44. Hey, anybody out there, Brother Zeke, anybody out there that read Isaiah 44 that has any questions or anything on that as the homework assignment? Huh? I gave it out Wednesday. Remember? I said Isaiah 44. The more you know about who he's talking about, the more light you have and a better understanding you have of today and the day of redemption that's coming. When you know who he's talking about. Now, if there's a divergence and you don't know who he's talking about, or you have misappropriated, or you have somebody else, oh yeah, I hear him speaking to that people, but this is the people and those aren't the people, then you're not going to see things in light, and you're not going to see with an understanding. But when you know who he's talking about, then you're going to have a greater understanding, and especially some of the things that are going to transpire in our lifetime, and as we see that day of redemption that is coming. And your only escape, like we read in Zechariah 8:23, your only escape is going to be in the body of Christ, in the Mashiach. That's your only escape. That's going to be the only escape for people, is to be in his body. And like it says in Galatians, all those who have been baptized into Christ, they put him on. You put on, believe it or not, you put on a Hebrew Israelite. Believe it or not. When you were baptized, and a lot of people get offensive, they get offensive to that because they don't want to see it like that. I don't want to see, when I see Christ, I just want to see a man. I don't want to see a man that is identified with any nation. I just want to see a man. But in prophecy, that's not what it is. Not in prophecy. In prophecy, he tells you who you're put in. And that's the only place of salvation. From the very beginning, even in the time of Christ, when he spoke, and even at in the book of Matthew, in the 24th chapter, and he talks about the abomination of desolation and how they had the daily sacrifice, which was leading all the way up to 70 AD. And at that time period there was the end of the daily sacrifice. The abomination of desolation, where the daily sacrifice ceased. Because they were still having sacrifices, even in the time of Christ. Even in the time of Christ, when he was here, they were still offering up. Where did they get the daily sacrifice? From Moses' teaching, yeah. They had a daily sacrifice that they were supposed to give up, offer up that daily sacrifice. So understanding who he's talking to and who he's talking about and where you have to be in this end time will bring out a better understanding and better enlightenment of the scriptures, and should give you a better understanding of your life. When you know a lot of these things are going to transpire, and we see the day of redemption coming, and we see the total breakdown and the chaos around the world, and we see a pestilence that's not just in this country but worldwide, and we see all of this going on, and you don't think there's a need to find shelter and find refuge and find a place where you can be there's some things that he's going to keep our eyes from. There's some things that he's going to keep our eyes from that we won't see. We're not going to see some of the things that's written in the Bible. There is a place of refuge. Okay, I'm going to finish up here, but let's look at this. Let's look at this, but I'm going to finish up here. In Revelation chapter 12, I'm going to start with verse 12, Revelation 12. I'm going to start with verse 12. I'm not going to read, you can read all this, but therefore rejoice, ye heavens, and ye that dwell in them. Woe to the inhabitants of the earth and of the sea, for the devil is come down unto you, having great wrath, because he knoweth that he hath but a short time. So the inhabitants of the earth and of the sea, he's telling, woe unto you, because the devil is down here. The devil is come down unto you, and he has great wrath. Why does he have great wrath while he's down here? Because he knows he's got a short time, because he knoweth that he hath but a short time. And when the dragon saw that he was cast unto the earth, he persecuted the woman which brought forth the man child. He persecuted. So the devil and the dragon is persecuting the woman that brought forth the man-child. So who was the woman that brought forth the man-child? Israel. Israel is that woman that brought forth the man-child. So the devil is persecuting that woman. And to the woman were given 2 wings of a great eagle, that she might fly into the wilderness, into her place where she is nourished for a time and times and half a time from the face of the serpent. So this woman has a place of refuge, has a place of refuge, has a place of protection where she's going to be protected from the serpent. And the serpent cast out of his mouth water as a flood after the woman, that he might cause her to be carried away of the flood. And the earth helped the woman, and the earth opened her mouth and swallowed up the flood which the dragon cast out of his mouth. Because the serpent, the dragon, the devil is and will continue to come after the woman or Israel. But Israel has a place of protection and a place of refuge. And that's why a lot of people, like it says in Zechariah, 10 different languages, they're coming in, they want to come into Israel. They want to come because they know that's where safety is. That's where protection is. That's where refuge is. It's going to be in Israel. Now, how do you get in Israel? Well, he that had been baptized into Christ had put on Christ. So that's how you get into Israel. It used to be before our Messiah came. How could you get into Israel before our Messiah came? Because other nations got into Israel before our Messiah. And we called them proselytes, because Ruth was a proselyte, where Ruth was a Moabite. And she says, your Yah is going to be my Yah, and your people are going to be my people, which means she took on the whole customs practices. The Most High Yah was her Elohim, and she took on the identity of Israel. That's how you would get into Israel. You could proselyte into Israel. Now, the only way you can get into Israel, you have to put on Christ to get in Israel. You have to be baptized into him. You have to put on him. That's why Jesus says, you don't know what you wish, and we know what you wish. Well, we wish it because salvation is of the Yahudim. This is how you have to get in. And who was he speaking to? We know in the 4th chapter, he was speaking to a Samaritan woman. He was speaking to a Samaritan woman. So they had to come into Israel in order to be saved, to be saved and have that salvation, that place of refuge. Just like 10 nations or all the other 10 tongues, all the other different languages, they have to come into Israel. In the 11th chapter of Romans, the wild olive tree had to be grafted into Israel. So the Bible is speaking about all these different ways to get into safety, to get into this place of refuge, because the day is coming where he's going to execute judgment, but those who are in Israel is going to have refuge. And the earth helped the woman, and the earth opened her mouth and swallowed up the flood which the dragon cast out of his mouth. And the dragon was wroth with the woman, and went to make war with the remnant of her seed, which keep the commandments of Yah and have the testimony of Jesus Christ. So the one that the serpent and the dragon continues to have war with is Israel, the woman, and the remnant of her seed, which keep the commandments of Yah and have the testimony of Jesus Christ. So I don't know how anybody can have the testimonies of Jesus Christ and not have keep the commandments. Okay, there's a question out there that says in Revelation 12:16, what would the earth be considered as, where it says earth helped the woman? Okay, in 12:16, and the earth helped the woman, and the earth opened her mouth and swallowed up the flood which the dragon cast out of his mouth. So the flood that was cast out, or the flood that came from the serpent. I'm trying to find the. Let's go to Revelations 17. Let's go to 17 to get some of this explanation here to kind of explain this. In Revelation 17, okay, let's look at Revelation 17 and verse 15. It said, first off in here, it said that the woman, she sits on, look, verse 15. And he saith unto me, the waters which thou sawest, where the whore sitteth, are peoples, multitudes, nations, and tongues. So what was the water? It says the woman sitteth upon the waters, but what was the waters? The water was people, multitudes, nations, and tongues. So when it says that the serpent sent out a flood after Israel, that flood that was sent out was people, multitudes, nations, and tongues. So he used all of these different nations and tongues. You can look at the history of this country. When you look at the history of this country, this, if it was left up to the people that formed this country and everything, if it was left up to them, there would not have been any seed left of those who were in slavery. If it was left up to them, they would not have let any seed of those who were in slavery to make it. It's almost like all of the atrocities and everything they did, and it's like, how did you survive? How did you make it through all of that? I was just thinking, there's a National Football League player who is a offensive lineman for the Seattle Seahawks. And I don't know if his wife, maybe it's his wife, his girlfriend or his wife, and he had brutally beat her, and he thought that he beat her to death. He thought he beat her to death because after the brutal beating he put on her, and she even thought she died or she was going to die, and yet she was still breathing, living. And then he said, "Are you still alive? After all I did, are you still alive?" Some people can look it up. It's out there. He thought he had beat her to death. And that's kind of how you have the descendants or the seeds of those who are in slavery. And the rulers of this nation back then, they're saying, how could you guys even make it? Are you still alive? We threw everything at you. And so when you look at this verse and it talks about the flood and how the devil was able to throw a flood or have a flood come after Israel, that flood was people, multitude, nations, and tongues to try to destroy Israel. So those who helped Israel, when you look at, we'll go back to Revelations 12 and verse 16. And the earth helped the woman because a flood came after her. The flood was a people, nations, tongues, languages came after her. And the earth opened her mouth and swallowed up the flood, which the dragon cast out of his mouth. So we know where the flood came. We know where the waters came from, because the flood is dealing with the waters. We know where the waters came from. The waters came from the devil. So the earth that opened up her mouth to help her. Then you have to go to Genesis. Looking at Genesis chapter 49, and you look at the things that, and Jacob called, verse 4, and Jacob called unto his sons and said, gather yourselves together that I may tell you that which shall befall you in the last days. So we're looking at the latter times and the end time. So going down here, and it talks about all the different sons. And with each son, it gives you kind of an explanation of how they're going to fall in prophecy in the last days. Let's go down to verse number 13. Zebulun shall dwell at the haven of the sea, and he shall be for a haven of ships, and his border shall be unto Zidon. Issachar is a strong ass couching down between two burdens, and he saw that rest was good, and the land that it was pleasant, and bowed his shoulder to bear, and became a servant unto tribute. Dan shall judge his people as one of the tribes of Israel. Dan shall be a serpent by the way, an adder in the path, that biteth the horse heels, so that his rider shall fall backward. I have waited for thy salvation, O Yah. Gad, a troop, shall overcome him, but he shall overcome at the last. Okay, out of Asher his bread shall be fat, and he shall yield royal dainties. And you can go on and read this, but this is how the woman is going to be spared after the enemy throws all of the flood, all the nations, all these people after him, because he's going to have a place of refuge for Israel. And you're going to have descendants of these tribes that are going to be like the earth, that's going to open up to Israel or to his people, so that the flood does not devour them. So the flood does not devour them. So reading Genesis 49 tells you the last days and the end of this time period. That actually goes, when you go back to Revelation chapter 12 and verse 16, and the earth helped the woman, and the earth opened her mouth and swallowed up the flood which the dragon cast out of his mouth. And the dragon was wroth with the woman and went to make war with the remnant of her seed, which kept the commandments of Elohim and have the testimony of Jesus Christ. So there's the earth, or you have those who are going to help Israel. They're in a position, when you read about the sons of Jacob, they're in a position to be able to help out Israel in the last days, to where they're going to be in that place of refuge. It even talks about the goodliness of it talks about how they're going to be spared, how beautiful it is. There's a place of refuge where Israel is going to be, that the devil and the serpent can't get to them. So if he can't get to Israel, where is he going to go then? It says it right there in 17. He was wroth with the woman, so he goes to make war with the remnant, or those who are on the outside. So you're going to have some that are going to be outside of the place of refuge and protection. And he went to make war with the remnant of her seed. Now, a remnant is not all. A remnant is just like some scraplings or it's the outer edges. A remnant is not all of them. So you have some of those, the remnant, that are keeping the commandments and have the testimony of Jesus Christ, and that's who he's making war with. He's going to go after them aggressively. He's going to go after them aggressively. Because you have some people, all right, let's go to Jeremiah chapter 50. Because in Jeremiah chapter 50, there's a cry that is made to come out I'm trying to find that scripture. I thought it was in Jeremiah 50 where there's a cry for them to come out. Okay, it's in, I'm sorry, Jeremiah 51. Jeremiah 51 and verse number 5. I'm going to read 5, 6, and maybe 7. But let's look at Jeremiah 51, 5. For Yasharal have not been forsaken, nor Yehuda of his Elohim, of Yahuwah of hosts, though their land was filled with sin against the Holy One of Yasharal. Flee out of the midst of Babylon and deliver every man his soul. Be not cut off in her iniquity, for this is the time of Yah's vengeance. He will render unto her a recompense. Babylon have been a golden cup in Yah's hand that made all the earth drunken. The nations have drunken of her wine, therefore the nations are mad. Babylon is fallen, is suddenly fallen and destroyed. Howl for her, take balm of her pain, if so be she may be healed. So Babylon, the cry goes out to escape out of Babylon. And we see that in the 17th chapter of Revelation, where it talks about Babylon, the great whore of Babylon. Babylon has fallen. So there was a cry to come out of Babylon. All of Israel, there's going to be a remnant, like it says in Revelation 12, there's going to be a remnant outside of the place of refuge where the devil is going to seek after her to destroy. Isn't that what it said in Revelation 12? It says she was wroth with the woman and she went after her remnant. She went after her remnant. And the remnant were those who kept the commandments and had the testimony of Jesus Christ, and they were the remnant, and the dragon went after that remnant to make war. But you had the rest of them that was in a place of refuge. So there's coming a time where the cry is going to go, flee, you better get out, but you're going to have some that's not going to come out. Everybody's not going to come out. I mean, because everybody don't believe this. There's a lot of people who don't believe it, and this whole book is his faith. This is when you read and compile this whole book together, this is his faith. And that's why he says that there's some that will not believe. He says, does their unbelief make the faith of Elohim without effect? No, not at all. I mean, you're not going to change his faith. You're going to have some that when the cry goes out, they're not going to leave and they won't escape. Because like it says, he's going to go after the remnant. He's going after the remnant. Don't you know the devil, that serpent, Satan, knows who Israel is? He knows who Israel is. He knows everybody that's being grafted into Israel. He knows everybody that's taken on the body of Christ. He knows all of those people. And that's why he attacks them. That's why there's a war against them. And there's going to be a war against that seed that remains outside of the ark of safety, outside of refuge. There's going to be some that's going to stay out, that will be outside of the refuge, that's going to have to, like it says, you're going to have to wash your own robe. Didn't he say that? You're going to have to wash your own robe, because when the cry was made, oh no, I ain't going to, oh no, I'm not going, I don't believe that. Well, now you got to wash your own robe now. It's not that you can't be saved, but you're going to have to wash your own robe. And what do you wash your own robe in? Blood. That's right. That's right. Doesn't mean you won't make the resurrection. You can still make it and be saved, but you're going to have to wash your own robe in your own blood. And then even those, it says in Revelation, even those are going to, who've washed their own robe in their own blood, they still have, they're still going to be a part of his kingdom. Why are they going to be a part of his kingdom? Because they kept his commandments and they had the testimony of Jesus Christ, even though they had to wash their own robes. So the totality of the book has to be taken into consideration, and you have to know who he's talking to, and as he talks to you about himself and about Israel and about the church, about the Gentiles, about the grafting in. I mean, all of this comes, the whole book is his faith. He doesn't do away with none of it. None of the Old Testament prophets, any of that has been done away with. None of it. Because there's a lot of things written in the prophets that has to come to pass. Has to come to pass. All right, so any questions? Any other questions out there? Any other questions out there? Any questions in the house? Let's see. There's no questions in the house. So I'm going to bring this class to a close, unless there's some other questions out there. If not, then we're going to say Shabbat Shalom. Thank you all for tuning in on today, on this Sabbath day. And we're going to be back here. For those who don't make it out tomorrow, because the bitter cold, we're going to go down to, they said the air temp is going to be 12 to 13 below. And with that bitter cold, some people's vehicles won't start in the morning, especially if they're left out all night. And then there'll be some that just won't make it out. It might be me. I don't